Hi students, we're going to work on rewriting the Unit 2 FRQ, and there's an opportunity for everybody to improve your score, and so it is something that everyone should do unless you got a 7 on the FRQ. And our students who are 7s, you are going to be our proofreaders for everyone else who is rewriting their FRQ. So when you rewrite the FRQ, you're going to write the parts that you missed. So if you only missed 1, you're only rewriting 1. If you missed 7, you're going to rewrite 7. And the proofreaders, so once you rewrite your section, you're going to hand it off to the proofreaders. The proofreaders for your period are listed in Google Classroom. So check the assignment in Google Classroom and find a proofreader, have them read it, and if they agree based upon the rubric that you got the point, then you're good. You can scan your document, you can upload it and turn it in. And yeah, so that's what's going to happen. And in general, I'm gonna say that most people, their biggest problem is they didn't explain enough. Now there were some of you who just got it wrong, completely wrong. You got a lot of them completely wrong. But for a lot of you, you had the right idea, but you really didn't explain it all the way through. So you maybe threw a term out there, or you just kind of threw some basic concept, or you, for example, mentioned one of the migration streams but didn't really mention where they're coming from or going to, just said migration stream A. And there were a few people who didn't write them in complete sentences. You just wrote a 1-word answer, 2-word answer, and that doesn't work for FRQs. This is basically a mini essay in that they're setting it up with these questions that all go together and all in one form a mini essay. So if you are just writing a couple of words as your answer, how is that ever going to turn into a mini essay? So you need to complete your thoughts and restate the question and completely answer the question, explaining, giving some details, giving some examples. Examples are your friends, so use some examples. Okay, this is really important to note that this FRQ came directly from your book, and all of the answers come directly from the book. It seems to be that some people think that there's some magical information out there somewhere that they didn't get, but that is not the case. So what I have done is given you a page number and shown you in the book where the answer is for each of the questions. So I'm going to go ahead and go over all of them. I know not all of you missed it, or missed all of these parts, but it is worth looking at all of them, and I'm going to have all of you do this. You're going to follow along in your book, and everybody's going to mark it. And the reason I want everyone to mark it, even if you didn't miss it, is because I want you to recognize where you can get information from. Your book is your greatest tool for this class, and so we are going to use the tool, and we're going to use it to its greatest extent. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So for A, you're going to go to page 112, and you're going to underline or highlight the definition of distance decay, because essentially that's what you're doing with this question. You are defining distance decay. I want you to label it A after you have underlined or highlighted. Label it A. And then you're going to use this definition in your answers. Or answer. You are going to write it in your own words, you're going to paraphrase, and then you're also going to address how the graph shows this definition. So you're addressing the graph at the top. So basically what you would do And one sentence is your definition. Your second sentence would be explaining how the graph shows it. So that's what you're doing for A. So go ahead and get that marked in your book. And then we'll go on to B. So for B, we are still using that definition of distance decay. Remember, we're looking at both of the graph and the map to answer this question. And you are also identifying a migration stream that demonstrates distance decay, showing that people move shorter distances rather than long distances. So you have to pick one of those migration streams. The ones to pick are B, C, and D. A doesn't work. Don't pick A. A is far. I know it doesn't look far on the map, but going from Asia to North America is very, 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 very far. So that does not demonstrate the distance decay concept as defined in the book. So you're going to pick B, C, or D. The next thing you need to do is you need to pick a place in B, C, or D. You can't just say migration stream B shows distance decay. Okay. What's happening in migration stream B? People are going from Mexico to United States is an example for B. It's a really common migration stream, and it's really close. The borders touch each other. You could talk about Syria and Europe. You could talk, that would be migration stream. I'm not looking at the map right now, so I don't know what migration stream that is. That might be D. And then migration stream C was going, I think, from India to Saudi Arabia, or so you can use any of those migration streams. I like B because I live in North America. I see that evidenced every single day in North America. So I like migration stream B. It's easier to write about. I know the country south of my border. I know it's Mexico. I'm not trying to write about UAE or Dubai or Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan. Quite a few of you put Afghanistan was in the Middle East. It's not, it's Central Asia. So I would say don't pick a country you're not 100% sure about. And you're all, I hope, 100% sure about Mexico. So I think that's a really good one to pick. So if you got this wrong, go with Mexico. Explain how that migration pattern demonstrates distance decay. So let's look at C right now. You're going to go to page 108. And on page 108, you're going to underline or highlight the definitions of the two terms, pull factors and push factors. And you're going to paraphrase the definition. The nice thing about push and pull factors is they're exactly the opposite. So you're explaining the difference between the two. By defining them, you've pretty much explained the difference between the two. It's obvious. But when you're answering the question, it's probably a good idea to restate it and combine the two. I said to do this, you could do it in 2 sentences. You honestly could do this one in 1 sentence. For example, you could say push factors are factors that make people want to leave a country, and pull factors are factors that draw people to another country. That would be fine, and that's 1 sentence, or you could do it in 2 sentences for sure. So you're going to want to make sure you're underlining or highlighting those definitions on 108 just to help you out. Okay, so let's go ahead and go down to D. D is on page 109. You're going to underline the sentence or sentences, I don't know if it's 1 or 2, under economic push and pull factors. You're going to label it D. And here you also need to consider the map and the migration patterns. So you're going to pick a flow. So one of the flows, A, B, C, or D, and explain an economic reason for the migration pattern. So I don't care which one you pick. And you just need to make sure that it's an economic reason that you're giving. And most of these migration streams have some economic component to them. Like, even if you looked at the migration flow from Syria to Europe, there's a persecution factor there for sure, and civil war, so it's more political, but there's an economic factor as well, because job opportunities in Syria aren't that great. So for any of these flows, just make sure you're picking the place from where people are going and where they're going to, and then pick country or region. Be really specific when you're identifying the places. If you don't know the country, use the region. You got to get something right. You either got to get the region right or the country right. And they're basically coming from one country where there aren't very many good jobs available, and they're going to another country or region where there are better jobs available. So that is going to be D. So let's go to page 109, and on page 109 you are going to underline or highlight the last paragraph, and then you're going to label it E. So this one has to do with those political reasons that people immigrate to a new country, and a lot of you gave some great political reasons. I was really surprised. I was really surprised that so many of you came up with a political reason that people leave China because of an oppressive communist government, or because of the one-child law, so people couldn't have as many children as they wanted. Some people talked about civil war in Syria, and so those would be great. Also from Central America, there's a lot of gangs and crime in Central America, to the point where the gangs pretty much run the country over, the government running the country. So you have, especially, and remember that's the triangle, that's Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, those three countries. And, you can say Central America and you can get it right. You could even say Latin America, but if you can be more specific, that's even better. But then again, if you're not 100% sure, don't be so specific that you're going to get it wrong. You're like, oh, I don't remember the name of the country. Is it Bolivia? And you're just coming up with a name. And so make sure that if you're not super sure about the country, that you're just naming the region. So those are some reasons why you would have that political migration. So on F, you're going to go to the last part of that chapter on page 121. Go ahead and go to page 121. And you're going to highlight or underline the first two paragraphs under the effects on countries of origin. So these are pretty short paragraphs, so you can go ahead and highlight them all. If you don't want to highlight it, I actually, when I did mine, I did quotation marks at the end and the beginning, because I didn't have a highlighter, so I did it with a pen. So just so you're marking that whole area. And you're going to pick one of those reasons and you're going to explain it. So a lot of you did this wrong, where you just said it's reducing overpopulation. Okay, well, what does that mean? What are the problems with overpopulation? Just being too crowded, that's not necessarily a problem. New York City is a very rich, vibrant economy, yet, and some people might say New York City is overpopulated, yet they don't really, when you consider the entire city, that's not a place where people are leaving because of economic problems. So it's not necessarily the case. Could be, but it's not necessarily. So you have to be specific and explain what are the problems with overpopulation, and because those people are leaving, it is alleviating some overpopulation, but what does that do for the people who are still there? It frees more resources for the people who remain in the country. Remember, the problem with overpopulation isn't being too crowded, it's not too many people, it's resources. It's resources. So if you've got a small family out in the middle of the woods, they don't need a flush toilet. They can go anywhere and it's not going to get too nasty. I know that sounds gross, but it's not. But now you put, 5 million people in that same area. Now you're going to have an overpopulation problem, not because there's too many people, but because you need sanitation to deal with like this mass overload of like poo. So you have to explain it all the way through. You can't just say overpopulation, and that was the biggest problem for that question. Make sure you're bringing it all the way around, not just throwing a term out there. What does the term mean? What does it mean to the people who are left in the country? Okay. So for the last one, it's on page page 122. Letter G is on page 122. So you are going to highlight or underline the first two paragraphs under effects on receiving countries. So for this one, you are going to identify a benefit for a receiving country. So because we, the United States, are a receiving country for a lot of immigrants, this is a pretty easy one for us to understand. Although I think our country tends to fixate on all the negative things about immigrants. Seems to be a common pastime in our country. But we're thinking about the positive benefits. And so you're going to see a couple of things there. And so, for example, let's say you pick culture. Cool. But if you just say a positive effect for the receiving country is culture, that's not enough. You need to explain what happens when people come from another country and they bring their cultural norms from their country to the new country and how it can benefit the new country. And you can give an example. For example, they bring cuisine from their country, and so then the new country has more variety of food. They bring new languages, and so then that new receiving country might have more ways of saying the same thing. It may make their vocabulary a little more complex in that country, which complexity is actually good. It gives us more ways of explaining things. So you just need to be careful that you are fully explaining this and not just throwing it out there. Culture, okay, what does that mean? So that was the biggest problem with this one as well, that people just were not completely explaining their answers. So if you go through this, you will see that most of these I'm suggesting that you have around 2 sentences for each one, that you're not shortchanging on answering these questions. You can have more than 2 sentences for each one. That's okay. It's just, that's a good guide for minimum, not maximum. So a good guide for minimum. Okay, that's it. Go ahead and write your missed questions and have the readers read your answers for you. Okay, bye guys.